All right, so let's get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the next issue of Business Science Magazine podcast. We're here with Dr. Timothy Ludwig, already waving to us. All right, so I'd like to jump in, Tim, and I'd like to read off your bio here. Dr. Timothy Ludwig earned his PhD at Virginia Tech, researching the benefits of employee-driven behavioral safety programs under Dr. Scott Geller. Continuing his postdoctoral work in industrial engineering, studying applications of W. Edwards Deming to quality and safety improvement. After graduation, and this is the really cool part, Dr. Ludwig consulted with the Department of Energy to study and improve their management systems on the new production reactor, a modern-day Manhattan project to build the next generation of tritium bomb. We definitely have to talk about that. As you put, thankfully the Cold War ended and Dr. Ludwig proceeded to work with the U.S. Navy's acquisition community, engaging in strategic planning and process improvement. Dr. Ludwig has delivered over 100 keynote speeches internationally. In his day job, Dr. Ludwig is a distinguished graduate professor at Appalachian State University, where he teaches in the nationally recognized Industrial Organizational Psychology and Human Resources Management Master's Program. Dr. Ludwig's teaching has been recognized with the North Carolina University Board of Governors Excellence Award and has been inducted into the university's Academy of Outstanding Teachers. Dr. Ludwig founded and directs the Appalachian Safety Summit. He also serves as the editor of served as the editor of the Journal of Organizational Behavior Management, where the seminal research on behavioral safety was published in the 70s. Dr. Ludwig also serves on the board for the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies and also sits on their commission for the accreditation of behavioral safety programs that seeks to recognize and share the best practices of the very top performing behavioral safety programs in the world. Dr. Ludwig has 30 years of experience in research and practice in behavioral safety, where he integrates empirical findings into his safety consulting. Also, he has just recently released his new book, What Are You Stupid? Dysfunctional Practices That Kill Your Safety Culture and What to Do About Them. So, Dr. Ludwig, Tim, thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
My pleasure, Adam. I'm doing great, doing great. Into summer, just got off vacation, got to attend, speak at the OBM conference, which is always a highlight of my year. So thanks for having me.
No, thanks for joining us. So speaking of OBM, I thought we'd start with a little bit about your background in OBM. So sure. When you weren't helping to develop the new tritium bomb, how did you fall into organizational behavior management?
Well, I like to joke that I was an OBMer before OBM was cool. That takes us back to the 1980s, 1990s, where I worked with Scott Geller, Dr. Geller at Virginia Tech, get my doctorate. And we knew there was applied behavior analysis. So we were going to what is now ABA International, the conference. Got to meet Skinner there, Fred Keller. But the OBM community really wasn't that big back then, or at least I didn't know about it, since it was mostly kind of out of Western Michigan and UNR and places like that. And we were kind of hanging out with a lone professor at Virginia Tech. So, but I did my research with the pizza deliverers back then, studying their safe driving practices, and had, time just kind of kept going from the 5 years as at Virginia Tech and then the grant that I got to study the same here at Appalachian State. So by the time I blinked, I had some 10 years of continuous driving data from about 5-6 different restaurants across multiple interventions. And so I was speaking at North Carolina, ABA, a small conference here with the North Carolina chapter. And right before I spoke, Tom Mawhinney was speaking. Tom Mawhinney is a professor at Detroit Mercy Hospital. He's in the College of Business, and fascinatingly enough, he's not a psychologist or an ABA, he was a management PhD, and just kind of taught himself behavior analysis. One of the strictest behavior analysts I ever came across. He was doing a speech there as well on hidden cultural practices, and so I got done and then he spoke, and then right after he spoke, I come running up saying, "Hey, I got 10 years of data, and I don't know what to do with it, and I hope JOBM would take me on." And then he goes, "Oh, I have an extra issue I need to get out this year, and so how about taking the whole thing?" So that was a bit of an auspicious task, but over about a 4-month period, Tom and I worked together along with Scott Geller, and we put together what's come to be known as the monograph. So, the pizza delivery study has been published in different places, including Journal of Applied Psych, but the compendium ended up in Journal of Organizational Behavior Management. I think maybe 5 people have read it, including my mom. But that outlines the whole thing that we did over many years and shows all the data and all the projects and stuff like that. And so I have to credit Tom Mulwiney and to get me into organizational behavior management, certainly through scholarly methods and the like. But I've been reading the journal for years. I've been reading his material. I've been reading Alice Dickinson's and the like. But he then introduced me to the community at the next ABA and started going to the OBM network meetings and et cetera. That's how it started.
I love that story. So, speaking of organizational behavior management, something that we always like to ask our guests, because we feel like everybody has their own description of what organizational behavior management is. So how would you define OBM for the people out there that aren't behavior analysts?
That's a great question, because if you read JOBM, especially during the 90s, you'd think it'd be the science of giving feedback. And Aubrey Daniels, started defining it as performance management. He found that he had a client in Paul Broyhill, part of Broyhill Industries, a big furniture manufacturing interest. He had Paul Broyhill was his first client, and he told Aubrey, "Don't call this OBM. Nobody cares about that in industry. Use the word performance." So Aubrey started calling it performance management. But it's very specific to the performer level, the individual. And the work of Maria Malott, Gary Rumler, my wife Maria Ludwig, and others, Heather McGee and the like, started getting us to focus on the system, how the system influences behavior, including the processes we work in and the different support functions and all the way to the customer. So, that along with the cultural work that Ramona Homan-Farr, Mark Aloysius, and folks over in Europe were doing, along with Tony Biglin, and there's a zeitgeist of sorts in the 80s and 90s, especially the 90s and 2010s, when we published Ramona and I published a book on complexity in organizations, where it started focusing on systems. There's kind of zeitgeist toward including these behavioral systems, because in my research with feedback and goal setting and kind of functional interventions, once the intervener was gone, the programs fell apart, even though we showed amazing efficacious results. So I would have to include in my definition a systems perspective. So let me take a shot on it with what I've been doing with recent clients and see how it sounds.
Okay.
OBM helps us align for the front line by putting in position the conditions that help the folks who add value to the company succeed. So we are not only focusing on the performer level, which typically is the frontline worker, when it comes to their operations, the quality of the work, the production, how much of the work they get done, the efficiency of their work, the safety of their work and the like, all that we can focus on their behaviors, watch their behaviors, and look at their immediate environment, and see there's a lack of feedback, or from the antecedent standpoint, the knowledge that's delivered in training wasn't performance based; it was just kind of conceptual. And we could do all that for the frontline worker, but the more I get into it, the more you see how other people's action throughout the whole interlocking contingencies of what we may call the business, the system, right, all interact with each other to put the frontline worker either at risk for not succeeding in quality, performance, safety, and the like, or we can make sure that all these different behaviors that create the system for these individuals are aligned, right? And so it's it's a concept I've been working on and still kind of practicing with clients on. It's a bit of a intellectual chew for them. It takes a while to understand, right? Because people say in HR, just think about HR outcomes. People in finance or the accounting only think their outcomes. The functional silos are still there. And when you say, if we're going to optimize performance of our company, we got to do it all aligned to one thing. And too often in strategic planning or organizational development, we put it around some kind of value statement like integrity or growth or blah, 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 which means something different to everybody. And if we could all look at the frontline worker, that's where the value is created. That's where the money's made, right? Now you could focus on sales if that's the value gem of your organization. You focus on the creative folks if you're, say, a software company. You can define frontline whatever you want, but if we can understand the critical behaviors of the frontline worker, through pinpointing and the like, and then look at the pinpoint of behaviors throughout, so the different roles in the organization, and see how they indeed set the conditions for that frontline worker, I think you got something really that really accelerate these other principles of growth and quality and customer service and that kind of thing.
Do you think that that's what separates OBM from other fields of study like IO, is the focus on the performer, the frontline worker?
Absolutely. I'm an IO psychologist. You believe you're focusing on the frontline worker, on the behavior of the employer, behavior of this entire interlocking system. But you're doing so through subjective appraisals of the bosses, right? And the bosses, their contingencies in their world focus on what makes them successful, right? Or keeps them out of trouble or makes their life easier, which is far from the impact on the frontline worker. And so I think what is instructing us in OBM are those kind of pinpoints that look toward not only the reliable observation of behavior where you're not using somebody's opinion, right? But also being able to go through workshops where you're pinpointing the kind of behaviors at the front line and throughout the system that actually add value to the organization, as opposed to just adding value to the stovepipe. Now, there are plenty of other approaches to, say, performance improvement, systems improvement, and the like, and we've learned from those. That's not something OBM actually created. The systems improvement, process improvement, system improvement, voice of customer improvement, that stuff has been built like our science through the 1940s, 1950s, and culminated in folks like W. Edwards Deming, Joseph Duran, and the like, a quality revolution, and then got sharpened up over the years through Zeitgeist processes like TQM, Total Quality Management, now Six Sigma, ISO, and lean manufacturing, and whatever else we create next. Too bad that OBM hasn't created some acronym that we can all get behind and go out and sell, and then everybody thinks it's the next great thing, and then we certify it. And
I do feel like we need somebody that's in charge of our marketing department somewhere.
Julie Smith would agree with you.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So would you say, staying on that for just a minute, one of the first OBM events that I went to like 10 years ago, somebody said something at the event that really stuck with me, that most problems at an organization can be solved with an ABC analysis and pinpointing. So you mentioned pinpointing a few times. So for the people, those people in the audience that aren't familiar with some of the more behavior analytic terms, can you talk about what pinpointing is and why it's so important?
What a pinpoint is, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a fancy word that Aubrey Daniels came up with. Instead of, we would, geez, in the science, I'm sure we have some fancy word that gets at the identifying the behaviors most critical to the function we're trying to create. I think Aubrey, nice and encapsulated a pinpoint, like you have a pin and you're getting right to the point. So behaviors happen all the time. We are prolific. You and I have been behaving for the last 15 minutes in a myriad of ways. And behavior's happening all the time. It's happening all around, and you can't. And other sciences like IO try to encapsulate all this together with some construct that's supposed to mean something like a personality characteristic and the like. And we know that behavior is managed by its environment. It's seeking out reinforcement. And so if we summarize something as one big term, we fail to be in a position we can understand the environmental contingencies regulating. I mean, the whole definition of personality means that there is no environmental things encapsulating, because they generalize it too much and they can't find anything. So the process of pinpointing allows us to get down to the critical behaviors that occur. So if you think about being in an organization, there are at any given moments a plethora of behaviors that an individual can acquire, adopt based on the situation they're in, right? They can make it quite functional, looking at the kind of behaviors that make them higher productive, quality, and safer. Or they can go talk to their friend, right? Or they can do something that's easier, that looks like it's busy, but not actually get anything produced. Or take shortcuts that put their body at risk and the quality of product at risk. Or they could take the extra step, go above and beyond, and call the customer personally and ask for feedback. So there's a lot of stuff you can do, right, that are governed by the environment or seemingly are governed by some covert event in our brain, right? So the process of pinpointing, as Cloyd Heighton has taught us, as Lori and Heather have taught us, we got to start with the business goals in mind, right? Or if you're in other like in education or in government or human services, right? You have specific goals that typically are customer based or client based, and those goals are to help that person's or those people's life get better. Help them do their world better, their process better. If you're in a business, you're downstream other businesses, we want to make them succeed. And if we can define how our business or our entity contributes to that success of our downstream businesses, then we know where we add value, right? And as we know where we add value, then we can drive that back into each person's job and say, what are the specific behaviors that you do that contribute to this value? And behavior is observable, it's measurable. Everybody can experience and say it happened. So these are quite specific. And so people get worried, like, well, there's just so much that we do. There's just so much that we do. And how can you pinpoint just a couple? Well, guess what? If you go and observe behaviors, you can see the variance, right? Variance between people. Some people do some of the critical behaviors differently than each other. In most of the critical behaviors that are done in a mature organization, everybody's kind of doing it the same, right? Let's not focus on the ones that are already succeeding at, they're fluent at it, right? We got to focus on the behaviors that need fluency, those critical behaviors. So critical behaviors are the pinpoints that are related to value or the goals. And then once you know what those critical behaviors are, then you go out and observe and you see variance, right? Sometimes the variance is even in yourself over time. So then with that, we can pick out just a couple things, right? I've been kind of getting into the 7 ± 2 range, where we pick those out, we observe them, we shape in the fluency, and we get rid of them, and we adopt new pinpoints. So pinpointing is uniquely a behavior analytic tool, and it's the most powerful because it directs us to focus on the things that matter in units of behavior that we can actually change, not big units of personality that or other constructs like growth or integrity that we simply don't have the means to change. And the reason we can change it is because of our other parts of the science. Once we can observe behavior, we can see the variance and we can analyze that variance and come up with a solution. Can't do that in other areas where we're just grouping human behavior together as a big construct.
I like that. I like that a lot. So kind of summarize a lot of that. What really separates organizational behavior management from others is, as you said, a focus on the individual, a focus on the performer, a focus on the frontline workers, and then some of the things that a lot of some of the celebrities in OBM have talked about in the past is identify what the business goals are, and then extract measures from those and create pinpoints regarded to behavior. So one of the things that I used to explain to my students when teaching pinpoints was being as specific as you can about behavior. And I think that that's something that really separates us from other fields, is how general they can be. So some of the terms that we've always heard is, I need you to do a great job at that. Well, what does great job mean? Exactly, what does great job mean? So I need you to, and then be specific exactly about what the behaviors are. And then something else I thought you mentioned that was really important was the relationship between the environment and behavior, which is really a core tenet of behavior analysis, I think.
And a key piece of that is the environment for the frontline workers, not only the physical environment, but also all the behaviors of folks around them and supervision all the way backward from the front line, right? So pinpointing is not only a frontline worker activity. Once you pinpoint the frontline worker and you understand that variance and the reasons why we're not getting the fluency you want in these critical behaviors, we need to go back into everybody's role in the organization and do the pinpointing exercise, right? Focused on obviously creating value for the organization, but now we have the added benefit of being wise to the kind of critical behaviors of our front line, whatever that may be, operations, sales, research development, training, whatever. So we can optimize it, right? To make sure that our workers are in a position to succeed. And that's sustainable there, once we got that. So pinpointing goes beyond just that frontline worker, and we do it throughout the entire organization.
Absolutely.
And that can be kind of tricky because, you know, a lot of folks in HR or engineering, you know, they do this, they're not doing algorithmic, you know, kind of tasks that you have on a factory floor. You know, they're using heuristics, they're creating designs, they're making decisions. Well, you know, verbal behavior too, right? And there's a lot of things they do fluently, but there's a lot of things that we need to shape up that they're not currently doing because they're in their stovepipe.
Absolutely. One more thing I wanted to talk about before we dive into the safety aspect was you mentioned something at the conference that we were at recently where, and I think you mentioned it in passing during your talk, where you talked about focusing on the behavior of the frontline workers, because when management get involved, it creates a lot of problems. So it reminds me of, and I know I'm paraphrasing there, so I hope I captured what you said, but there's a phrase that we talk about in organizational behavior management all the time: management without supervision. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of focusing on frontline worker behavior? And I know you said that we also pinpoint management behavior and things like that, but why is it so important to focus on the frontline worker as opposed to the managers?
Yeah. Well, you know, managers are creating the context for that manage that regulate, that set the context for frontline worker behavior. So they're every bit involved in this as anyone else. You know, in fact, they're increasingly in my world becoming the focus of intervention because they're the ones that can make a sustainable change in their own behavior and in the environment of the worker. But you know, if you look at your automobile, right, or you know that nice weight set you have behind you there, the manager didn't create that, right? The engineer designed it so we could focus on their value add, right? But even though the engineer designed it and the salespeople are selling it and the research and development folks are getting the right materials that have the right tensile strength, and the marketers are out there showing it on TV and the like, and your customers are using it, the frontline worker is the person who is going through a process, hopefully pretty well designed, that any variance in that process will create, say, a quality problem in the product that the worker then, that the customer then experiences, right? And that creates a crappy product. I've started to get these things. I got a new Mac Pro that only has these USB-C things on it, and then I got to buy these dongles. I've been through 4 of these dongles, right? Sending them back, getting refunds, giving bad reviews on Amazon. because the engineers haven't put the right stuff in it, right? But then I get some of these that work really well, right? But then the second one that I use at the university fails. What's the difference there? And so I'm no longer using Lintian, right? And gave them a bad review on Amazon because as a customer, I can't do my process well, right? So then they don't have the revenue to continue their process. And you get it all the way down to that frontline worker, right? Where one worker was putting in the pins and the glue accurately per spec of the engineer, and another person varied on that, right? And so now we got ourselves a critical pinpoint that links all the way to the customer, right? The Deming taught us, the Quality Revolution taught us, lean manufacturing, and the Japanese who developed it have taught us that when you want to learn how to improve your business, you have to go where the value is created. And so they, in their process, lean manufacturing, if you do it right, you have vice presidents of the organization trying to solve a problem going down, I shouldn't say down, going down to the floor of the front line and just observing their behavior, observing the process, how they interact with that process, how they interact with their environment. And that's where you get a lean solution, one that works and one that's not full of other crap because you don't really understand what's going on. So, why the frontline worker? Well, that's where the value is created. Why the frontline worker in safety? Well, that's where the risks are taken, yes. Right? Why the frontline worker in quality? Well, that's where that's where the quality issues tend to occur when there's variance down there, right? And so if the engineers are doing their job, where they're pinpointing employee behavior in their designs, maybe we don't have a process and a design that allows a worker to have that variance when they're gluing on a part or something like that. They've thought through the human behavior involved in their design because they've gone and observed behavior. They understand the pinpoints of the frontline worker. And that's what I mean by driving the pinpoints through the rest of the organization by going, observing, understanding, pinpointing that frontline worker, because that's where the value is created.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'd like to segue away from pinpoints for a few minutes and kind of dive into safety. Well, maybe not segue away from frontline workers because they're the ones at risk for safety incidents. So, but let's talk a little bit about safety. And so our version, if I could call it that, of safety intervention and organizational behavior management, we affectionately refer to it as behavior-based safety. So, so how would you define behavior-based safety, and how is that different from other safety technologies out there?
Well, the first folks that started diving into safety in our science, many I probably don't know myself, right? But you think of Judy Kamaki and Besoser Azaroff, and Dwight Harshbarger and others, they didn't use the term behavioral-based safety. They called it behavioral safety, right? Because you're applying the science to the safety goals of an organization, the safety processes and the like. A process came along in probably late 1970s, continuing when I went to grad school with Dr. Geller, championed by Scott Geller, Terry McSween, Aubrey Daniels, and others, where employees go and observe each other, observe pinpointed behaviors, observe each other doing work, and then immediately give each other feedback, right? So you have a moment there where a person gets feedback, both reinforced for their safe behaviors and getting corrective feedback and some ideas around their at-risk behaviors. And so their behavior changes there on the spot. We've also found out that when somebody does an observation, John Austin found that the person who does the observation tends to change their behavior 3 times more than the person who got observed and got feedback. So a lot of benefit there. But then the cards get turned in, the behavioral observation cards get turned in. It's no name, no blame. It's anonymous. We don't know who got the observation, who got whose behaviors these were. And they get turned into typically an employee committee, right? Because of a trust building exercise where people are more likely to participate in observing each other if the information goes to their colleagues, right? And everybody's in there to try to work it out. Then this data gets put together and trended, and we see where the risk is. And then we do things like ABC analyses and the like to come up with interventions and continue to observe behavior until we have relative fluency in the company. And then we maybe see some of the roles of other systems, like procurement and engineering and supervision and the like, to come up with solutions that can then mitigate the risk, right? Better equipment, processes, facilities, management systems like training and measurement and things like that. So we learn from this data and we go and make changes. So that technology, that specific way of doing it, got to be known as behavior-based safety. And once it showed its efficacy, through word of mouth, JOBM has published a number of articles on the success of these kind of interventions. Wanda Myers, Terry McSween's prior partner, and actually Terry probably wrote the article, is a great example in JOBM that describes this and shows the empirical data of success. The Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies, I'm on a commission there where we accredit the best in practice behavioral safety programs. And so we show programs like this and the impact on injuries, significant impact on injuries, decreases in injuries associated with successful performance of programs like behavior-based safety. But, so it got popular. It went nuts. It became an industry in of itself. And so when I went to grad school, I got out, my colleagues were all my generation went out into behavior-based safety and became consultants, and it probably drained OBM of its brain trust to a certain degree. They were quite successful, made a career out of it. But then there were the charlatans, all we need is a piece of paper with a bunch of behaviors on it, and then they go and check it off, and then they became management driven. The supervisors went and did observations. They used it for discipline. I've been all over the world and I've seen all kinds of variants of behavior-based safety. And so in the safety world over the last couple of years, there have been significant debates on behavior-based safety has run its day, and it's failed in many places because there's a lot of systems you got to put into place to make sure it succeeds. And you can easily take a bastardized version, not based on the science, put it into place, and it fails. So you got a lot of successes that we've documented. You got failures, and then there are the next Zeek guys coming along. The current one is called Human Organizational Performance, which says we need to build the systems. Humans are going to screw up. There's always going to be human error. We need to design systems that take the error out of our processes. And then they say this is a direct opposition, to BBS. And there's actual literature in the safety magazines and other popular social media that people are saying it's in direct opposition. We're not blaming the worker like you do in behavior-based safety. We're coming up with solutions, and you're just sitting there talking, and it's just a bastardized version of what behavioral science is. And those of us who that practice the science, we know behavior-based safety is only one piece of it, but they're very well aligned. What systems do you go out and change that impact behavior? The only way you can find out is going and pinpointing and finding out what those are. So after years of a new market trying to emerge and trying to beat down the other market, I think the bigger safety world's starting to see that we're really talking about the same thing. And kind of like I talked earlier about, organizational change is a practice that's been around corollary to behavioral change for all these years, right? It's the same thing in safety. We got this behavioral change has been around really successful. Now this organizational change, systems change is catching up. And I think we're reaching an intersection where they can inform each other. We can learn from them. Once we know our pinpoints and we trend behavior and do our ABC analysis, we can learn from them the systems that really make an impact, and we can create systems that are sustainable, but they can learn from us what behaviors we need to be targeted because we've gone out and observed and found risk. Otherwise, they're out there just creating systems for the sake of creating systems, and we don't know if it's actually having an impact on behavior, if it's targeting the right behaviors in the workplace. So in the last, what we've been trying to preach in the last 5 years is behavioral safety is the bigger approach. Behavior-based safety and its variants, values-based safety, people-based safety, and the like. That's just a technology. That's been packaged, right? It's been evaluated and proven, right? But when we talk about a line for the front line, when we talk about targeted observations to fluency, performance-based training in safety, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all these other behavioral approaches we have, right, in our science that aren't necessarily part of the BBS of old. So we try to keep it, and we're successful in making the case and making maybe the market for applying the science, right? And then continuing to solve more specific problems for our clients because of it.
So there was a couple of things that you said that I wanted to follow up on. You talked a few minutes ago about frontline workers observing other frontline workers' behavior and giving them feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So does that tie into a quote unquote good safety culture? How do you build? So I was actually just doing some consulting work maybe about 2 months ago at a manufacturing plant. And as soon as we walked in there to do the assessment, one of the first things that they said was, we want to create a positive safety culture here. We want to make safety a priority. I'm sure these are statements that you've heard many times. So can you talk a little bit about what a safety culture is and how that relates to behavior of frontline workers?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you'll probably have to put up a little bit of a rant here, because this is, safety culture is, there are companies called safety culture and they sell software, really. And everybody knows that if you have a culture, a positive safety culture, whatever, that's the magic gem that drives everything else, right? So you can create your systems. You can have the best systems in place, measuring incidents, analyzing, going after minor incidents and near misses, and having training. You have all these things in place, right? But if you don't have a strong culture, they're going to just wither on the vine. So everybody kind of knows this culture thing is, and when I hear it, I think of a couple of things. First of all, I just ask them, well, what is a safety culture? And then they can say, oh, it's shared beliefs, values, and assumptions. Well, what is that? And then they end up just admitting, oh, they don't know. They simply don't know. Even though they've had consultants come in, I'll have speakers right in front of me during conferences getting up and saying, we just have to win the hearts and minds of our employees. If they just had the right attitude and had the shared beliefs and values that make up a culture, we can win the game. And then I get up and say, are you telling me that all the employees don't value safety? They come to work to get hurt, and managers, even though they're taking shortcuts, they don't value safety. Why the hell are you insulting these people, right? Don't tell them what their values are or are not. And frankly, you don't even know, because it's a construct and you can't measure it, right? So we got to behavioralize culture, because that's the only way we can understand what it is. Secondly, that's the only way we can pinpoint what behaviors are involved in this thing called culture. And then thirdly, we can then ask our questions around what we can do about it, right? So let's pinpoint it. It's actually quite simple. Behavior involved in culture are people talking to each other. In the safety world, it's safety culture, people talking to each other about safety, right? The frontline worker coaching the colleague after doing an observation, that's talking, right? Coming up with a solution to help that behavior from happening again, that's talking, right? A supervisor who is sharing a risk assessment and asking an employee to get up and say what their version of it, that's talking, right? That helps safety. A leader who is asking her subordinates about the safety implications of a budget decision, that's talking, all of which help safety, right? But at the same time, a worker who distracts another worker by talking about the football game hurts safety, still talking. The supervisor who tells his workers to take a shortcut, make things get done quicker, but even though they're taking much of a risk, that's talking, that goes against safety. The leader who focuses their verbal behavior on production and doesn't give the safety professionals time to talk during the meetings, that's talking or not talking. And so you can see how talking can promote safety and not, right? And the thing about talking is it happens all the time, right? And it can build on itself. Talking can be reinforced. Behavior seeks out reinforcement. Talking can be modeled. And talking can be used to come up with solutions, because as you talk, you start developing your understanding of why we behave the way we do. And this shared talking allows us to come up with solutions. The final cool thing about talking is it's a behavior, and you can count it. You can see when it's happening, like now between us, and when it's not happening, such as the viewers of this podcast right now. So we know when it's happening. Because it's a behavior, we can analyze it. We can do an ABC analysis on why the talking's occurring, right? We can measure it in mass. We can look at these cards that are turned in, the minutes of meetings. We can look at what artifacts of talking and measure it not only on an individual level but across the whole organization. And so instead of thinking about safety culture, some hoity-toity, kumbaya, let's go hug each other, right? But let's just consider it as talking, and then consider the interventions that promote talking as cultural interventions, right?
I like that a lot.
Yeah, with that is and agree.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I want to dive into your book in just a minute, but one more topic that I feel is important to discuss with regards to safety and culture and behavior. We've been talking so much about ABC analysis, and I was reading Judy Agnew's book the other day, Safe by Accident. And something in there really, it is. And something that really struck me was the chapter on signage. So she had a great example in there on signs that say, wear your safety goggles, or wear your PPE, right? Your personal protective equipment. And I remember walking into that manufacturing plant a couple of months ago, and the only people that were wearing their safety goggles were the 3 consultants. So I thought we could maybe talk about, just for a minute, the relationship between behavior and consequences, and for the non-behavior analysts watching, what consequences are. And I wanted to use the signage as an example. She had a great example in there that you'll see something that will say, wear your protective goggles. Nobody wears them. But if you have a sign that says, go to the break room, there's free ice cream, everybody's in the break room. Right. Because your behavior of showing up, of walking to the break room is reinforced with ice cream.
Yeah, you get a consequence of ice cream.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit about the relationship between consequences and behavior, and what consequences are in the safety world?
Okay. Well, first of all, you can't get a consequence for wearing anything, right? Wearing is not a behavior. Wearing doesn't pass what we call the dead person tests. If a dead person can do it, then it's not a behavior because they're dead, right? So therefore, wearing, my grandma, who's passed, is wearing a nice brooch right now, but she's not behaving, right? So a lot of times when we try to analyze behaviors, it's because we don't have a good pinpoint, right? We're saying, do this task, right? Complete this task. Well, that's not a behavior. Behaviors are the movements of the employee in the context of that task, or the verbal behavior and the decision-making in the context of that task. And wearing something, a passive outcome of behavior that's occurred prior, is not a pinpoint. So instead of wearing PPE, the real pinpoint is putting on your PPE, right? So then, if you look at the pinpoint of the behavior, you cannot understand that behavior by just saying put on your safety goggles, right, or complete this report or something like that. Because we really haven't defined behavior. Behavior is defined in 3 terms. We call it the 3-term contingency, right? You have to put the behavior as an action in the context of the environment the person's in, right? And describe the outcome of that behavior. In our science, we call behavior an operant. It's kind of seems like a fancy word, and I always thought it was like some scientific word until I read Skinner and found out that operant, he named it operant, is because when we behave, we're operating on the environment to get something we want. I've been talking for a while. I'm getting thirsty. I'll just operate on the environment momentarily. And as a consequence of me doing that, my thirst has been quenched, right? So if you're going to talk about a behavior in that situation, right now, I'm not picking up the glass and drinking. Why is that? Because in this context now, I've been satiated. I'm no longer thirsty, right? So in order to describe the behavior I just did, you have to say something like, when I find myself talking for a long period of time and get thirsty because I have a dry mouth, If I pick up my glass of water and drink it, then I'll no longer be thirsty. And so, in order to define a behavior, you have to describe what's happening in the context, the antecedent or the activator, the behavior itself, which is an action done to something, because we're operating on the environment. It's not just me moving my hand, I am picking up this glass. And then thirdly, what is the outcome? What's the consequence of doing that? So in my book and in my practice, it's a simple sentence. In this situation, if I act this way, then this will happen to me, A, B, C. If in a situation where I am a worker on an oil rig and I find myself climbing some 300 feet up to the rig and I brought the wrong clamp, I have a choice. I can kind of rig this clamp to fit, and just hope the line doesn't explode, or I can walk all the way back down to the procurement tent and go find the right one, right? So in this situation, I just climbed to 300 feet. The client needs this work done by noon, and my supervisor is waiting for me to get done with this, so then he could instruct somebody else to do something. That's the situation I'm in, but I also have the wrong clamp. If I go back down and get the right clamp, then as a consequence of that, it's going to be another 15 minutes. I'm going to be more tired. My supervisor will be on my case, and we'll get in trouble because the client was expecting to have this done by noon, and the contractor is coming in. We'll have to delay just because of me, right? But if I rig the thing a little bit, probably nobody will ever figure it out. If it does leak, I'll probably be gone. Supervisor will maybe even praise me for getting things done on time, and I, cover my ass. So which way am I going to go? Which way am I going to go? And so an ABC analysis is essentially trying to go through the immediate consequences that were happening at the point of the behavior. Let's say the clamp was rigged and put on and then exploded and then harmed some people that were on the rig, damaged the product, and there was an environmental spill and there's fines. And so now we do the ABC analysis and we can understand in that moment why that person probably didn't go down and get the clamp. But then we got to take it further and go through what we may call the consequence chain, the behaviors of other people, these pinpoints that we talked about with aligning for the front line that contributed, put that person in a position to rig the incorrect clamp. Why were they put in the position in the first place to take the risk, even though they knew they were doing it? So then we ask about the procurement manager, like how do you design your procurement tent that somebody can pick the wrong clamp out? Why isn't somebody there helping deliver the right clamp? Then you can go through procurement. Why is it engineered that you need different clamps? Why don't you just have one clamp that fits all the system, blah, 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 blah. You can just keep going through. And so then if we get these other pinpoints and we solve these other problems we may call upstream, then, that worker is going to come up with the right clamp every time. And even if they don't, they have systems in place that they're not in a hurry. They don't have a kind of a production-based environment. So the ABC analysis, once we find variance in behavior, once we find the risk being taken to body, product, quality, production, then we use the ABC analysis to understand the immediate antecedents and consequences in this situation. If I act this way, this will happen to me. But then try to figure out, well, why do we put the person in that position? And why were these consequences apparent to them at the time where they felt the only option is to do that one behavior? ABC analysis is a potent tool, but typically what I see it used with these teams that are doing behavior-based safety is it becomes very myopic to the individual, right? And they always end up, they too often, like 60% of the time, end up with saying, it was a bad decision. It was human error. It was, something to do with the individual. And then all they do is coach that oil worker who used the wrong clamp, right? Or train them more, or use other antecedents like signs that just because I'm in this situation, I got all this other stuff going on, but hey, I saw a sign saying use the right clamp. Those don't work because our antecedents, the situations, aren't powerful to us unless they're linked to our outcomes, linked to the kind of consequences that could happen. I even drive it back when you define a behavior. I have a sentence structure that says you have to put the action, verb, and subject. Pick up the glass, right? But I also have to put in the situation. When do you pick up the glass? when you're thirsty, right? And then you have for what purpose? To quench my thirst. And so even in the definition of your pinpoint, you have the key antecedents and consequences, the key situation and probable outcomes. So then, when a person is observing someone else doing a behavior and coaching them, they can understand the situation. They can look for the situation, and they can describe the kind of consequences in their feedback. So the ABC analysis, critical, but we can't be myopic. Just like OBM, we gotta also include the systems in it. I was just on a call to South Africa this morning where a team there is building their ABC analysis training, right? It's a construction thing, so they have projects all over the world. And we're coaching them. Hey, let's put in a couple extra steps that drive some of the systems solutions that we need.
Love it. So I'd like to do a kind of a hard left turn here with our last 10 or 15 minutes. I'd really like to talk about your book a bit. Again, this is the shameless plug here for you. So your book, What Are You Stupid? Dysfunctional Practices and What to Do About Them. Something that struck me when I reread your book a few days ago was your emphasis on labels. So I wanted to see if we could dive into that just for a few minutes and talk about how labels can be problematic and when they should be used with regards to people versus behavior. So can you talk a little bit about labels?
Yeah, I wanted to write something that was kind of a primer to behavioral science, right? As Judy does, as Aubrey was really good at doing. And it occurred to me that when I get done with a speech or I'm working with a company and I sit down with their leadership and start asking them what drives behavior and why did the last incident occur? It was always focused in on the person, right? And if you get them kind of a little bit libations going or get them speaking freely, or if they don't know who you are, and you really get to the crux of the matter, they start using words like wrong or it was bad. And even workers will do that in describing their own behavior that led to risks and injuries. And I bet in more private moments, I don't even bet, I know it's there, when you're doing an analysis of an incident, more what I call labels occur. That guy was just stupid. He was lazy. He this, that, and the other. And it occurred to me that it's easy to label ourselves. We do it all the time. You make a mistake as you go about your day, and you're like, oh, I was stupid. I forgot, or boy, I was just being lazy here and there. So it's a natural human reaction. The cognitive psychologists are saying that there's a system 1 and a system 2, our fast brain or a slow brain. And we're, our brains are evolutionary set up to make really quick decisions, right? This organism is coming at me. Is it going to come and eat me? Do I have to fight it, or do I run away? Or is it neutral, right? And so we are always labeling things in our environment to determine our behavior. The reason our brains got so big is because we interact with each other, not only through verbalizations, but your facial expressions. And so we're not only just like an animal sizing up the environment around us and kind of just labeling threats and non-threats. We now have this social set of behaviors, a social set of perceptions that work in the same system, the same fast thinking. And so our fast thinking brain is labeling, and we certainly label each other really quickly. Even the best behavioral scientists can't get away with not doing that, right? And then you have the system 2 brain, the analytic brain. It's basically the rest of the brain, the behavior analytic brain, that now steps back, takes yourself out of it, takes the other person out of it. It's not about the people anymore. And we're now analyzing the real reasons why that behavior occurred or something in the environment occurred. So, when the supervisor catches somebody doing something wrong and it's against the rules, it's actually reinforcing to go and grab them and catch them like they're a fish and hold them up in front of everybody and go, look at this is wrong, and call them stupid and call them stupid around other people. And as they're talking to supervisors, they're saying Adams is really stupid. And then, of course, Adam's going to agree if that was stupid. And then everybody, and then the result of that is that if it's something that actually happened, that's called coaching, right? Adam, you're stupid. Yep, okay, I was stupid. Well, don't do that again. All right, I know. And then you're going to be back in the same environment you were before with the same situation, same outcome, same ABCs. And even though you intend to do it, I don't want to be stupid, you'll end up doing the same behavior you were before because your environment's causing it, right? Unfortunately, labels are addictive, right? Somebody in power or management calling someone stupid, I don't know, it's reinforcing to them, and other managers like it. And frankly, in our world, we like to talk about each other and share these perceptions. And so labels a dysfunctional practice, right? Because it actually hurts your safety culture. Calling someone stupid, talking to other managers, calling someone stupid, that's talking, right? Is it helping safety? No. Is it hurting safety? Probably, because when you start calling me stupid, I'm less likely to talk to you, right? Because what are you going to do? You're going to punish me for talking to you. Therefore, I'm no longer going to do it. And you're not going to hear the great ideas I have to make this a safer workplace. So it's a dysfunctional practice that hurts your safety culture. And instead of labeling the person, because even you can't change the person, our science is not about changing people. Instead of telling people to be something different, why don't we help them do something differently? We can change the do. We can't change the be. We're not their parents. We're not God, right? But we can change the environment they're in. So let's focus on what they can do. And when we're labeling, we're focusing on the wrong thing. And then we get frustrated. We get managers who label get all pissed off and frustrated, and they think humans are impossible to work with, when in fact, it's because they're labeling. And they're thinking that's the root cause that keeps them from coming up with solutions. And so I wrote the book to teach them a better way, right? You don't need to label, you don't need to blame, you don't need to use fear to change behavior. It's as simple as going out and watching, going out and observing behavior, pinpointing, asking questions of your employee, talking to your employees about the risks they're being taken. You're not blaming the worker anymore. Instead, you're looking at it fairly neutrally, brain two, system two in cognitive science that says, let's analyze the situation. It's interesting that Adam did that thing, right? I didn't like it. He didn't like it. He might have gotten hurt. But instead, let's use this as a piece of data that we can go and change Adam's environment so he's not in a position to take that risk anymore. And by the way, it's not just Adam. You put anybody in that situation, they'll probably do the same thing. So by solving the behavior, by labeling the behavior in this situation, if I act this way, this will happen to me. By labeling the behavior, we can then do something about it. By labeling the person, we just get frustrated, we can't do anything. That's the crux of the book, trying to point out these dysfunctional behaviors, kind of a fun way, right? That managers kind of look at their own, and people do, so do workers. Workers do the same thing, right? Kind of look at their own behavior and say, these aren't functional. And let's look at the science and how it can teach us to be more objective and use things like the ABC analysis to go and find the management systems, the equipment facilities, the environmental situations going on, just the peer-to-peer interactions of talking that we can intervene on, because now we've labeled the behavior instead.
I love that. You've got a great story in here that I want to talk about at the end with regards to Miranda in the book. So I definitely want to take some time to get to that. But there's one more thing that I wanted to cover for our audience that I thought was really interesting, was the section of the book on the cascading dominoes theory. Mm-hmm. So could you explain what that is and how that works in the context of systems and the environment at an organization?
Yeah. Well, the cascading dominoes as a model theory has been around since the 60s. It's something that I've written on, Aubrey's written on, Scott Geller's written on, and it fits into this interaction between behaviors and systems really well. And so, if you consider injury or any other kind of quality outcome as a domino that you don't want to fall. If that domino falls, then we've lost the game. The last thing that happens before this bad outcome is typically human behavior. There was a statistician for an insurance company named Heinrich back in the 1920s and 30s who did some analytics, early analytics, to find out, and he said that something like 80 to 90% of all injuries were caused by human behavior, because the behavior occurred right before, right? And therefore, behavior-based safety tends to suggest that the worker's to blame, because that's the person who behaved. Heck, B.F. Skinner said that 90% of the results we get in the world are due to human behavior. Deming, who was the quality revolution, said that 80% of outcomes are due to human behavior, right? But Skinner, Deming, and others who instruct our science and our practice also said that when you look at the reasons why people behave, 80 to 90% of the reason why we behave is due to the system and the environment we're put in. Only like 10 to 20% is due to some personal environmental thing, right? So when you get to personality theorists correlating their constructs with outcomes, the best you're going to get is a correlation of like a 0.30. If you square that, you come up with the effect size, which is, you know, the impact. You're only capturing about 10% of the reason why people do what they do. What's the other 90%? The environment we're put in, right? So the dominoes, getting back to the dominoes, you got the outcome falling. We don't want that to fall. Human behavior right before that, right? But instead of saying, let's blame the worker because that caused the injury, we're looking at all the dominoes that put that worker in a position to do that behavior, to take that risk, right? And so those include the equipment you're given to work with, the tools you're given to work with, the facilities you work in. It's talk about the work processes, how they've been designed, how you've been instructed to do the steps that you do. You know, typically that encourages shortcuts or encourages forgetfulness or fatigue. Or, you know, then believe me, there's always a better way, and the worker will tell you. Or it could be what we call the management systems. Those other systems like your training and what you measure and how your supervision interacts and how you assess things and how you procure things and the like. And then, you know, you keep going and you can consider now all the different potential reasons why that person was put in a position to take the risk and ultimately maybe get injured. And you can see all those cascading down. And so by the time the worker is in a position to take the risk or put on the wrong size clamp, a lot of other things have failed that worker to the point where they are considered the cause. Now, when I teach this to employees, they get all excited, like, yeah, it's management's fault, it's management's fault. Then I like to say, well, when you're pointing, you got three fingers pointing back at you, because the very first domino, right? If all else fails is what we call culture, right? If that person's in the position to take a risk and all else has failed him, there's still probably usually another worker right next to him that can say, hey, wait, Tim, let's not use that clamp. I'll go talk to the supervisor, talk about, we'll make sure the delay happens. You run and get the other clamp, or let me run and get the other clamp while you get prepped. There's always that other person that is nearby in their immediate environment that could have done something as well. So we're not just talking about management systems and the like, we're talking about the people you're working with. And so if these all fail, now, if we can go out and pinpoint what these behaviors are, because we're observing, we're talking about the risks that are being taken openly and honestly, we're out there collecting data to see the trends and how often this happens, and we know that it has variance, then through our observation and through our ABC analysis, we could find the flaws in the other dominoes, right? And we can go and maybe pull that domino. So then when the cascade happens, it stops there because we've solved that problem. We don't have the right equipment and facilities. The work process is a little bit off, right? But we've guarded the equipment in such a way. We've figured out that this risk is happening, and if we put a guard up, that would keep the person protected, or PP or something like that. If we have the bad equipment and facilities and we go look at the work process and we say, you know, you're going to come in contact with this piece of equipment that's starting to fail, so we need to do some inspection. We need to add some inspection in our work process so that the worker could be appraised of the potential to fail, right? And then we pulled that domino. So even though the other stuff's falling, we don't let the cascade go all the way to the behavior. That's the concept of pulling the domino.
Absolutely. And, you know, I do want to end this segment with one of the quotes that you had in the book that really struck me, which is, your system is perfectly designed to produce injuries you've suffered. And I think that's a lot of what you were talking about there, all of the dominoes together.
Yep. I mean, you go talk to the manager. I'll sit down with a leader, and you know, like the workers, they just don't get it. You know, they're just out there doing stupid stuff, and I say, well, they'll tell me about your most recent injury, and they'll tell me about whatever it was, and I'll just go, well, why'd you let that happen? They go, what? I don't even work on the floor. I don't even. I say, well, why'd you let that happen? You know, I mean, you designed it. This is your system, right? You're in charge. Why did you design it in such a way that that worker was in a position to take that risk, right? And actually, that's quite liberating for them. After they get past the embarrassment or anger or whatever, they know it's a developmental opportunity to look and say, this labeling, the reason I'm frustrated is because I'm labeling and I'm doing these dysfunctional practices. But if I'm in control, I have the tools to observe behavior, analyze behavior, and think through the systems that I need to put in place. I'm in control of that. I can do something about it. I can't be in control of a person, and coach them and train them. That simply is not going to work. So
Very
that's
liberating and empowering for the manager to know that they can
should
make a
be, yeah,
difference.
should
Yes,
be.
absolutely.
Exactly.
So at the very end of the book, you have a fantastic story about a student named Miranda.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was hoping you could talk about her story really quickly and talk
Sure.
about the importance of her story and how that relates to the theme of the book.
Okay, yeah. It'd be my pleasure. A little story time for you at the end of the time. Those of you watching this at night, this will be a nice bedtime story. So I was working my way through grad school. Obviously, got my behavior analytic cred in there, and certainly one of the greatest efficacious things that we're really good at in behavior analysis is helping those whose lives are not as set up like the rest of us to live it fully. Folks with disabilities, and one of those disabilities are intellectual disabilities, and so. And we're good at designing programs, behavioral programs that help people build fluency in eating and grooming and talking and things like that. So with our autistic clients, with our intellectually challenged clients, with our regular students, heck, with ourselves as well. And so I had worked my way through college, working in mental institutions. I built my behavioral competencies in grad school. And so kind of as a side job, I'd drive to a nearby town to a residence that served the severely intellectually challenged. Back then we used the term mental retardation. So it was a severe mental retardation. And I was a staff psychologist, right? And for the most part, I'd go in and do kind of IQ testing with the new residents. And so, when you're looking at somebody who is severely mentally challenged, you're not doing kind of the IQ tests that the SATs and stuff. You're seeing if they can comb their hair or use a fork or verbalize a full phrase. And there's some variance in that area. But one thing I learned is these are the most wonderful people in the world, and you feel so empowered after leaving and hugged on and loved on, and they see you as a true person. It's just amazing. But came across this one woman named Miranda, or no, I'm sorry, this is Violet. Came across a woman named Violet who she was self-injurious. She would slam her arm to a point where it'd be all bruised when she got agitated, and she couldn't verbalize anything. And I estimate her IQ below 15. She couldn't feed herself. She'd throw forks across the room. And we were concerned, obviously, and it had been building over the years, even before I got there. And at one point, while I was there, Violet punched her fist through a sheetrock wall, right? Didn't break anything, but the social worker who was in charge of the residents said, she's of harm to herself or others. She may need to go to another institution. And now none of us wanted this to happen because that would be, they're already in a state institution, but it's like a residence, and then we'd come and go, and they're free to kind of mill about. The other kind of institutions are the state institutions, the likes of which they're kind of locked in their room and in a larger place with the people that have severe problems, behavioral problems, including. So we were trying to work with her, and in this team, there was myself. I was a psychologist. You had the psychiatrist who was there giving out medications for the other kind of mental disorders that tend to occur with severe intellectual problems. And then we had the staff and the social worker. And so the psychiatrist started and said, well, Violet is schizophrenic. She is hallucinating, right? And when she's hallucinating, somebody's talking to her and she's fighting it off. And so I've been giving her Halidol, which is a psychotropic medication for schizophrenia. I've been giving her Halidol, and I think it's getting worse. So I'm going to triple her dose. Now, Halidol, you may know from your college days as Quaaludes. Horses may know it as a horse tranquilizer, but I guarantee you, if you took 3 times the amount that she was taking, you wouldn't hallucinate and you wouldn't do anything else as well. Then it came to me, and I said, well, she is severely mentally retarded. So, there are behavioral programs that we can use, but there's some that we can't use because of her ability to conceptualize and interact. So we need to get really based down to the base behaviors and build fluency with reinforcement and talk about extinguishing some of these other violent behaviors and things like that. And so I did that thing, and the rest of the staff had their day. Then I got to Bob. He was a social worker and smartest person in the room too, right, in the end. And he says, well, before we do chemical and before we do kind of this behavioral emotional, let's understand the context she's in. Let's understand her world. Let's understand what physically is happening to her. And he took her out to a medical doctor, and they did a full a physical. And they found out when she was 15, she had broken her ankle very severely. And she ended up getting a plate put in. And that plate was there to support the ankle until the calcium built back up. But she was a ward of the state, and she wasn't verbal, and they forgot to take it out. And she was kind of she was deformed in other ways genetically, and I guess everybody just kind of thought that big bulge in her ankle wasn't arthritis, wasn't this plate. It was just another deformity. And they found out they had this plate in, and she was in pain. And so Bob had surgery done to take the plate out. She went through rehab, and she came back a completely different person. She was no longer hitting herself, so she got completely taken off her Halidol. The psychiatrist labeled her as schizophrenic, when in fact the context dictated the behavior. I labeled her as severely mentally retarded, but the situation she was in with pain and the like made her injurious. I had and when she came back, if I would have redone an IQ test, some 15 months later, her IQ would have jumped up a standard deviation because now she was using a fork that I didn't know she knew how to use. She was verbalizing words. She was saying things. I had labeled her severely mentally retarded, but I didn't consider the context. Even the behavior analyst, right? And it took Bob to say, she's in a situation that's causing this. Let's understand it. And then before she left, they found out she had cataracts. She cut her cataracts out, and she did a full sentence and hugged me on the way out. And it was a complete transformation that really taught me that, even though we know this behavior analysis, we're so easy to use labels. And so then I go write the book and preach this stuff, and then it comes to Miranda. At our university, we make accommodations for students that have disabilities, right? So if they can't walk, we build ramps. If they can't see, we have audio programs. We have people doing sign language. And, for intellectual disabilities like learning disabilities and ADHD, we make accommodations for them too. I have dozens of students every semester getting extra time on their tests or extra tutoring or things like that. I'm pleased to do it because we know as educators and we know as behavior analysts that we need to remove the barriers to these people's success. And so we can't let their disability get in the way of their performance and make sure they're on an even playing field. Well, about 10 years ago, I got this email saying that the Office of Disability Resources was now classifying intellectual challenges, such as mental retardation at the time, intellectual disabilities, as a accommodation group, as a disability that we're going to make accommodations around, and they're going to start admitting students who are below 70 in their IQ, in the intellectually challenged range. And I remember talking to a colleague going, "Oh no, that's just a bad idea." The reason IQs were generated to begin with was to predict future behavior, and so that's why we use the SATs. And admitting students that don't have the aptitude to be able to perform is not going to help them. It's not going to help us, right? So they let people in anyway. I guess they don't ask professors their opinions, and good, and rightly so. Because in the end, 4 years later, a young lady named Miranda graduated with her bachelor's degree in art therapy. She was in my Sunday school class, so I knew her well. And I remember talking to her on her graduation, telling her just the story I just told you. And I said, how easy it is for me to look beyond what really creates human performance, what really people are able to accomplish. And too often, even folks who preach this stuff can get caught up in a label that just generalizes a whole bunch of people together, and we don't realize how much work and effort and success you, Miranda, put in to your success today, to your graduation today. And it just keeps teaching me over and over again, that the behavior is a miraculous thing, and it can be accomplished across the board if we just take time to analyze it, understand it, intervene upon it, and let people succeed. There's no such thing as a bad worker. There's no such thing as a bad person. There's no such thing as somebody that's incapable. Skinner taught us, and Watson before him, give me any three kids and I can turn them into everything if we just manage the contingencies around it. So just talked for a little over an hour and just told you that I'm an idiot. So there you go. Here's the label for me.
Excellent bedtime story. So as we end here, what are your professional plans for the future? So where can we find you speaking at next? Where can we find more information about the Safety Doc?
Okay, well, great. Oh boy, what am I going to do? I'm a bit of a puppy, So if I see a squirrel, I just go running after it. I could be much more successful if I kind of stayed on one track and really focused on, say, safety or something like that. But I'm a scientist as well, so that means that I have a lot of questions I want to answer, a lot of stuff I want to teach, and I got a limited time frame to do it. And next speaking engagement, I'm going to be speaking with the Army Corps of Engineers up in Michigan next month. In October, I'll be at Behavioral Safety Now, which is in Orlando, Florida, behavioralsafetynow.com. You can go check that out with a lot of behavioral folks that you can follow in the safety world. I'm teaching at a conference in November called The Future of Safety Excellence. Boy, just a number of things in the new year. I'm already getting tired thinking about it. At App State, I continue to teach for the 25th year and teaching my OBM class this semester and getting them all whipped into shape. I teach an organizational development class, which is a systems perspective, behavioral systems analysis in the spring. So that gives us a lot of great projects to work on and demonstrations to do. We got a grant through National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health to test the efficacy of analytics in safety management. So in safety, beyond even the behavioral data we collect all kinds of data on people, incidents, equipment, the environment, production, fatigue, and other HR kind of stuff. And the big data analytics group, a lot of my colleagues are statisticians. They're coming to me saying, we could really do something in safety. And me as a scientist, I'm going, oh, that's bullshit. It ain't going to work. But as a scientist, I say, let's try it out. So NIOSH gave us some money. And for the last year, we've started on a 3-year grant to gather data. And we're finding out that a lot of companies just don't have the data management integrity that we really need. So it's turning to how to develop this kind of thing. So that's what's going on in the academic world. Books, I got one under my belt, but it's a 3-book series. So when I finally stop chasing squirrels around, my second book will come out. I think I'm going to call it Kids on Rebar, How to Reinforce Your Safety Culture. Yeah. Story of how I learned reinforcement through teaching my kids how to be safe. And that'll be another discussion we can have. And the third book will be on this cultural variable and the alignment for the front line. I'm going to call it It's Not My Car, something. And then by the end of it, we have a 3-book series. And then I got the trilogy, and I'll be like Lord of the Rings and go retire. It's for yourself and myself and a lot of us out there. You just got so much stuff in your head, and until you get it out in a book form, or I put a blog out on safetydoc.com. That's safety-doc.com, because people that want thousands of dollars have stolen the first name. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn and the like. But I have a blog and a podcast I put out monthly, unless I'm going to Africa all the time. And it's just getting my thoughts out and putting it in the form that managers and workers can understand, a little storytelling kind of time. It's just amazing as you start looking at everything you've written over time, how, in my case, how diverse it is and how many different thoughts you had. And that's why it takes a community, right? A community of OBMers, all with their own thoughts, digesting each other's thoughts. And eventually we start, creating the application of our science in a way that's digestible. And then we got the version of lean and Six Sigma out there that your generation and ones that'll follow you can enjoy.
Now we just need a really clever name for that that can be put on posters and covers of magazines everywhere. So maybe Obi owners, who knows?
Well, my generation has failed at that, so it's up to you guys.
Well, you guys did a lot in the way of the science. So our generation is standing on the shoulders of giants, I would say.
And so, I mean, we got bigger giants that I'm sitting on.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Tim Ludwig, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll be seeing you around soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody out there. Keep up the good work. No, that's not reinforcing. Keep doing the behaviors that make you and make us successful and help the world.
You should do motivational talks outside of safety too, man. We've got a lot of energy.